All right, so this is going to be a real treat, everybody. This here is Travis Snider. He grew up in the Seattle, Washington area, had a great run with youth sports, very successful, ended up playing 8 years in the major leagues, now works with a group called 3A Athletics back in Seattle. He has an amazing story. I think you're all going to really enjoy it. So, Travis, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you guys for allowing me the opportunity to attend this conference and speak to you guys about what's most passionate in my life, which is my children. As Brian mentioned, my name's Travis Snider. I'm the CEO and co-founder of 3A Athletics. I played 16 years professionally, which I'll get into that story in a little bit, but being able to sit here and kind of catch the end of that presentation that was going on, and you guys are talking about the cancel culture, as Brian mentioned, from Seattle, so we invented the cancel culture out there, and all you guys have to deal with it, and I apologize for that. The other thing I wanted to get out there, I'm a rookie. This is my first keynote speech. I blame Brian, because he doesn't have the monitor ready for me, so if I'm looking at my phone, I promise I'm not scrolling on Instagram. I'll do my best to keep things going. So yeah, as I mentioned, father of three. I have a 7-year-old son, a 5-year-old son, and a 3-year-old daughter. My beautiful wife there as well. The passion behind all this for me is the kids. I was fortunate enough to play at the highest level. I've been around youth sports since I retired, in different ways. But understanding what's most important for us, every person in this room, is the children that are experiencing youth sports and how that has the short-term and the long-term effects, the risk involved, which is your guys' job, right? To figure out what are those risks, how do we mitigate them, how do we provide kids with a better opportunity. Why I'm here, as I mentioned, I'm a father of 3. I was very fortunate to have an incredible youth sports experience that I want to share a little bit with you guys. As I mentioned before, professionally for 16 years, I played baseball and got a chance to travel the world and meet so many different people and develop relationships that when I look back on youth sports, those are still some of my favorite memories. So this is why it's a big passion for me to be here. Want to talk about not only the good stuff, but the bad stuff that comes with the experiences of youth sports, and then be able to tell you guys a little bit about 3A Athletics, my role in the company, and what we're trying to do to provide services and products to people in the youth sports industry. So as I mentioned, youth sports experience for me was pretty epic. Started in YMCA. My mom worked at the YMCA, so grew up there doing the rec sports experience, which, as we all know, the rec sports experience is almost dead, and it's a sad thing to see how competitive everything has gotten now at such a young age. So many parents, the misunderstanding of this is how we're going to achieve these great things, and it's starting way too young. I was fortunate enough to have that success going into Little League, right? As a 9-year-old kid, I made the all-star team, was starting catcher. We ended up winning the state championship, which at 9 years old, you don't really know what's going on in the world. Now I think kids are much more educated than we were back then, but it was a really cool experience for us to get to go travel out of state one time per year, win this tournament. The next year we took second place in state. The third year we took first place again in state, and we went to the Western Regional Tournament down in California. Again, great life experience for me, but a story I'll share, my experience in that tournament that wasn't so great. And just something for all of us in the room to be conscious of as we're looking at kids at certain developmental stages and their experience of actually playing the sport versus what we project onto them as the adults who are organizing the tournaments, standing on the sidelines, modeling behavior that we don't actually want our kids to model. After the Little League experience, travel ball, right, which I think most people in here are familiar, whether you're soccer, swimming, whatever, club sports has become like a mandated thing for kids to start at 8, 9, 10 years old, sometimes earlier. I was lucky enough to be held back in that until I was 13 years old. I mean, we had competitive tournaments playing Little League All-Stars, but for the most part, it was a group of your buddies going and playing Little League baseball, and then some of the best players were then selected, right, to play select travel baseball. During that time, we won 3 national championships in a matter of 5 years. I was the best player in the state of Washington from the time I was 9 years old to the time I was 18, and I'm not telling you guys that so you think I'm cool. I want you guys to understand the underbelly of all this and how that early success, right, can lead to long-term mental health issues that we're all aware of in youth sports. So getting a chance to play with that core group of kids from my Little League experience on into travel ball, going into high school, I was a starting middle linebacker on the varsity football team as a freshman. I'm the same size now as I was then, so it kind of helped out that I was early developing, physically speaking. But at that point in time, I remember reading the first news article that was written about me in the school paper. And they said, "You don't know Travis yet." And they talked about in that article that someday you might be seeing me playing professionally in football or baseball. I loved football. It was something that allowed me an outlet, right, in terms of the physical activity, but also the anger that I'll kind of get into later, what I was experiencing off the field. But ultimately dealt with the injuries that come with playing contact sports, but learned a ton from that experience. On the baseball side of things, we had, as I mentioned, this core group of kids, this community that we all grew up in, went into the high school experience, and like I said, played varsity baseball as a freshman. Sophomore year, the expectations were through the roof. We didn't live up to those expectations, but as a group, we rallied, spent the next 2 years grinding. We took third place as juniors and then went 27-0 and won our state championship as an 18-year-old kid, which is like, this is all storybook, right? I couldn't look back and say, I wish we could have done more. There's not many people that get to experience that. But again, I don't tell you that so you think I'm cool, right? I just want everybody to understand what is the experience of being really good and how does that affect us as we get older, whether we play professional sports or not. At the end of high school, I got to do the recruiting experience, right, which is to go travel to 5 schools, go to the football games, parade you around campus. Pretty cool experience. Signed at Arizona State University and had an opportunity to either go there on a full ride scholarship, or what eventually happened is I got drafted, right, by Major League Baseball draft. I'm 18 years old. I was the 14th overall pick in the first round of the 2006 draft. At 18 years old, they gave me a $1.7 million signing bonus. Anybody in here become a millionaire at 18? I was not prepared for that, right? And I think we can all laugh and say, what were we doing when we were 18 years old? Luckily, right, this community of youth sports that I grew up in, I had tons of mentors that helped me navigate that experience, helped me manage my money, helped me grow into the adult that understood, financially speaking, as well as risk, right? Because my whole job was public image, PR. I always had to kind of wear the hat and check the boxes. And I think without that youth sports experience, I would have been lost. So there's a lot of good that I want to get into, but it's also, how does that affect us? Once I was drafted, I went to the Appalachian League. I met a few people from West Virginia, Kentucky. I was in the Appy League. I ended up 18 years old, living in a hotel room with 2 other guys, 1 other bed and a rolling cot. 18 years old with $1 million. That's how I started my career. And I'm sitting there experiencing the world of youth or professional sports for the first time, away from home, no parents, no support system, and it's just me in the game of baseball. Luckily, I was able to get off to a good start, won an MVP in that rookie league, and ended up going that year to the instructional leagues, which I won't get into all that, but a year and a half later, I made my major league debut, 20 years old, right? I mean, this is an absolute rocket ship that I've been on. And all the while, right, as I'm experiencing all the success, the mental health, the emotional health that I'll get into is starting to bubble. Being able to play 16 years, as I mentioned, was a true honor. But not every year, not every season, not every experience that I had in that was positive. A lot of good things that I can take away from it. But again, how it relates to youth sports, how it relates to the people in this room. How many people in here are parents? Okay? If you're not a parent, are you friends with parents that have kids that are in this experience, right? It's incredible to me to see how many parents have been sold this narrative that if you want to achieve all these great things that I can put up on here, this is the way you got to do it. You got to start them young. They got to do travel ball. They got to be competitive. Let's push them out there, and let's not think about where they're at in their developmental stages. So the real story I wanted to come here and share with you guys are the struggles, mental, emotional, physical struggles that I went through. I know I was talking to Casey in the back. He has a much longer surgery list from youth sports, so if you guys want to hear it from the expert in the room, that's him. Yeah, so my first surgery was after my freshman year of high school, sophomore summer. And I ended up having 2 major bone chips taken out of my elbow. And at 15 years old, I was prescribed pain medication for the first time, right? Which we can all probably relate to a moment where we've been prescribed pain medication. But as a 15-year-old kid, there's a lot of risk that comes with that, right? And that's something that throughout my childhood and the surgeries that I've had, I've always had to be mindful of what is this really doing to me and how do I mitigate the long-term risk of getting addicted to something like that. I was able to overcome that injury, right, and go back and continue on playing baseball, just could no longer pitch. That summer, I ended up having the last play of our spring camp for football. Said, the coach, I'm going to the baseball game, I'll see you later. This is baseball season, right? And we're doing the spring camp. I ended up getting tackled, fractured my fibula, tore the ligaments in my right ankle. My foot, was, instead of like this, it was like that. It was pretty gross. And I'm sitting there in the back of an ambulance, again, pull up to the hospital. I'll never forget getting that shot of Dilaudid. I went from crying to smiling, and it was, again, we're building a narrative here with, okay, it's great to go out and play sports, but how do you deal with those injuries? As Casey and I were laughing about, what are the long-term effects of those injuries, right? And as I mentioned, as a rookie, I forgot that first one. 11 years old, we went to that Western Regional tournament after winning the state championship. I had thrown a no-hitter in the semifinals and hit 2 home runs. I mean, I'm on cloud 9. I go down there, strike out the side, 3 outs in the first inning, hit a home run. Second inning, I go back out there, I can't throw a strike. I'm struggling. I'm hyperventilating on the mound. I don't know what's happening other than I'm having a sports-induced asthma attack, right, which is what it was labeled as at the time. When I started my therapeutic process later in my life and I started to go back through these past experiences, I realized I actually had a panic attack, right? And that's something, if you guys have seen the Little League World Series on TV, it's one of the coolest events of the year to see those kids out there and the major league guys coming in. It's great for the brand, it's great for the game, it's great for the kids. But my worry, right, is in my own experience and seeing how many of these kids go and achieve kind of this fame status, how are they going to live up to those expectations when they're 15, 16, 17? When they walk onto the field, everybody's pointing out, oh, you played in the Little League World Series, you're that guy, you're that guy. I was that guy my entire career in youth sports. And then getting to the major leagues at such a young age, it was really something that I hadn't experienced true failure at that point. I mean, some bumps in the road, some surgeries, as I mentioned, but was able to overcome those things that were surgery-based experiences. In high school, the other piece of this I'll dive into a little bit was my experience off the field. I've talked about this publicly, so I feel comfortable sharing this in the room. Both my parents were addicts, right? One functional, one not very functional. It was Thanksgiving 2003. We're at my aunt and uncle's house over in Eastern Washington. My mom's hallucinating, screaming on the bathroom floor. I'm 15 years old, I run in, this is what I see, right? So we take her to the hospital, she spends 2 weeks in a coma, breathing off the machine. And I'm a freshman in high school, just finished my varsity football season, again, king on campus, right? People are talking, I'm feeling pretty cool about myself. Now all of a sudden I gotta go visit my mom at the hospital for the next couple months. The one thing I want to highlight as a positive in all that experience is the community of youth sports, right? The other parents, the mentors, the second moms, the second dads, my best friends, they all rallied and they were there for me and for my family. And that was at the hospital or bringing meals. So again, the world of youth sports, I like to bash on a lot of things that we know are obviously high risk for kids and not in their best interest, but there's an unbelievable community of youth sports that if we're all conscious parents as we're going into this, understanding the impact that we have not only on our own children, but on the rest of the kids, right? And I was that kid. I was a kid that needed scholarship money. I was a kid that needed rides. I was a kid that needed the extra, parental guidance throughout my life because at that time, my mom was basically not functioning, right? So once she recovered from that, was on the liver transplant list for about 2 years, battled the addiction. You got to stay sober while you're doing that. One thing I'll always be grateful for with my mom and my dad is I watched them both attempt to get sober, right, and successfully stay sober for extended periods of time. I was a kid that grew up understanding AA, GA, all these A's, right, that come with the addiction world, and also got to see my parents modeling that behavior. Even though it wasn't always successful, I'm grateful that both of them showed me that and were able to give me that understanding of what addiction is and how you deal with those things. The other piece that I didn't cover, sophomore year of high school, family was evicted from our home, childhood home that I grew up in. So as you can tell, on the field, sky's the limit. Off the field, I'm battling, right? I'm putting on the face. I'm putting in the work. I'll say this about my parents. They supported me throughout every step of the way of my career. Never pushed me, never forced me into sports, never made me go practice. That was all internal for me. But at that point, at 14, 15 years old, I didn't know if my parents were going to be there in a couple years. I didn't know who was going to be the person that's actually going to help me get through all the things that I ended up going through in my life. Once I got to professional baseball, immediate success. As I mentioned, I'm in the major leagues at 20 years old before I can even have a drink legally. Luckily, I was playing for the Blue Jays, so in Canada, I could have that first drink. Probably another piece of this, right? We talk about high performance, good decisions, made a lot of bad decisions in my career, but at the same time, got to experience some really cool things and understand how that pressure of expectation, right? For us as parents in the room, we want great things from our children. We want them to grow up, hopefully, first and foremost, be happy and healthy, right? We as parents do a very poor job, me included, of not projecting those expectations onto our kids and not understanding, hey, whether your son or daughter is 8 or 10 or 15 or 20, whether the best player or the worst player on the team, it's not about their scholarship. It's not about their ability to play at the next level. It's about their experience of having fun and playing the game, right? And that's where things get quickly off track because we as parents also are the ones that are funding all this, right? And we have a vested interest, an emotional attachment, all these things that come with being a parent, which is really hard, and it's a really deep experience. And it's one of the most triggering experiences, right? If any parents in this room can relate to me, your kids are a direct reflection of your behavior. And that's a tough one for me, because I see when I slip up and I do things, how they react in certain situations. And as the adult, I got to model that behavior. In 16 seasons, I had over 30 transactions, right? I got to the big leagues at 20, and then I spent the rest of my career going up and down between the major leagues and AAA. Most of my struggles were mental. Definitely had some physical injuries in my career, 15 plus injuries, multiple trips on the IL, right? We have to say IL now. Had a major toe reconstruction surgery in 2013. At that point, I had played in the wildcard game for the Pittsburgh Pirates that year. They decided to renew my contract, even though they knew I was having surgery, which I'm forever grateful for them. Overcame that toe surgery, bounced back, had my best year in 2014, thinking I found my home. After 6 years in Toronto doing this, I got to stay in Pittsburgh for the better part of 3 years and felt like I had kind of found my place. What ended up happening that offseason is I got traded to the Baltimore Orioles. And culturally speaking, it was a completely different experience for me, right? As you can see, the experiences I've had in my life create a lot of instability. And in my career, I didn't have that stability anymore. As in youth sports, it's pretty stable. In pro sports, as people understand in this room, it's very, very volatile, especially when you're dealing with the mental, emotional, and physical stuff. I've been released multiple times, been traded multiple times, and been demoted, as I mentioned, multiple times. The last 6 years of my career I spent in AAA, or in what is called independent baseball, which is something, if you would ask me when I was 22 years old, would you ever play any ball? I'd say, you know, you're crazy. I'll go home. I'll go to the beach in Mexico with my wife, and I'll be done. Like, I would not ever stoop to that level of playing independent baseball, which independent baseball is like the poorest of the poorest minor league baseball experience. And people aren't familiar. The major leagues is like the Bentley, the Rolls Royce, the private planes, all these things. The minor leagues is like the Subaru Outback. It's a grinder. It can get, you get places, you ride buses, you take connecting flights. It's not the same. And then you get to indie ball, and it's even a step below that. And I share that with you because in the last 6 years of my career that I was trying, right, to validate this whole experience by getting back to the major leagues, and I was very close multiple times, but I didn't get there. And I went through this process where my ego was fighting to hang on, right, to all the narratives that the expectations early in my career being projected as a top 5 prospect in all baseball and the best player in the Blue Jays farm system, to now I'm playing independent baseball in Long Island, New York, riding on buses around the Northeast with some former major league guys, some guys that never even played professional baseball. And I had to figure out, do I still love this game? do I still want to do this? I had my first son, my wife got pregnant the year after, so at the time we had one child. And I was going through this process internally and saying, okay, what is this really about, right? Because I have to do this, this, and this to get back to this goal of reaching the major leagues. And at that same time, my brother-in-law was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma. So he had multiple tumors in his brain, 2-year-old son, same as my son. And went through this process where I thought, okay, this is it. I'm done. I didn't get picked up. I'm going to go home. I'm going to take care of him. Was there by his side to the last day. We got kids. We got things to think about. As I was going through this experience of watching a 36-year-old man die, essentially, right? I'm looking at him and I'm like, I just spent my entire life trying to achieve these things. I got more in the tank. You know what I mean? Like, I'm watching this guy lose every opportunity just to be able to walk and talk, and I'm bitching about having to ride on buses in the Northeast playing independent ball. So it really gave me that perspective shift. But during that time, I was struggling with this whole experience of the once was, chosen one, whatever you want to call it in terms of potential, to now I'm just grinding to get back and have a bench job at the major league level, which is, it's embarrassing, right, as you're going through it. It creates a lot of self-doubt. The unshakable confidence that I had coming out of high school was a plus makeup guy at 80 plus on a scout scale. Like, no scout had any concern about my ability to mentally grind through things, but at this point, I was completely broken. And I spent the last 3 years bouncing from AAA team to AAA team through the COVID experience. In 2021, I was in Georgia. My wife and 2 sons at the time. My wife was 8 months pregnant. We had our daughter in Georgia. I was playing once or twice a week in AAA, right, which I would have killed for 2 years prior to that. And then it really started to settle in. Okay, what do I want to be after being a baseball player? Who am I? What makes me valuable, right? And I think that's, to tie it back into youth sports, as you guys kind of heard my story, this has been building for the last 15, 20 years of this is Travis Snider, the baseball player, which again, gets me the opportunity to stand up here in front of you guys, gets me into doors, gets me into sitting at tables that normal people wouldn't get to. So I'm grateful for all of that. But I also recognize, right, how many parents want that excellence or that experience for their kids, but don't realize it's got to be, first of all, their kids that want it. And second of all, we got to learn how to mitigate, right, what our child's experience is like through these sports and not put the expectations on them to go and achieve all these things. Just be themselves and play the game. Started doing marriage counseling with my wife, the challenges of professional sports and being away, all that stuff. We were in a place where we felt like, hey, we got to put in some work here. I was also at the time working with my now partner at 3 Athletics, Seth Taylor, and Seth is a therapeutic life coach. And my work with Seth was different than any work that I had done with the highest level sports psychologists and the people within these industries that I was grateful to work with. We really started to go back through these previous experiences on and off the field. And at that point, both of him and my marriage counselor looked at me like, have you ever heard of complex PTSD? I'm like, I didn't go to war, so I can't imagine why I would know anything about this, right? Well, what I came to learn is these experiences that I had just suppressed. You know, losing my mom I didn't mention, she passed away when I was 19 years old, the year before I made my debut, in a drunk driving accident. So we can, you know, if I start crying, I apologize, but the amount of energy that I was suppressing over a 15, 20-year span led to what I think are some pretty cool personality traits. I don't know if my wife would agree with all those things. I'm pretty intense. I like things structured. I like knowing what's going to happen, right, because of all the uncertainty that I had in my life. But as you could see from my career, that wasn't the case. So the career that I had at baseball was a triggering experience, just like having a wife and having a child, or multiple children. But what I didn't realize is that last 6 years that I was battling my ego, it really was preparing me for life after baseball, right? And that's where I'm doing therapy, I'm starting to do the healing. This will be a lifelong journey for me, and anybody who's in that space, you understand that, you know, one day is great. We got to take it one day at a time. And at that point, I was really passionate about getting back into youth sports. My best friends are all the best local pitching and baseball coaches. The organization that I got a chance to work with is one of the best in the Northwest. And I brought multiple coaches together and formed this training business. Like, we're going to not only incorporate a high level of understanding how to train kids in sports, but now we want to incorporate the mental and emotional piece, right? So at this point, I got a chance to partner with a 25-team organization, who really wanted to provide kids with the best experience possible, not just on the field, but just culturally speaking, they wanted to give them more than just the average baseball team. So I'm in this position as the director of player development. I get a chance to go around all the practices. I'm the one coaching the coaches, making sure we got the right people in the right places. And I got to start having conversations with parents in the world of youth sports. Because being in professional sports, right, you get to do some cool stuff and hang out with kids in youth sports, but you're not really immersed in it. And I'm looking at this in 3-5 years, this is gonna be me and my children. So I went in there really looking to learn as much as I possibly could. And I quickly realized every conversation that I had with parents was telling me how good their son or daughter was, right? What they're ranked in the state, how many games their team won. I said, sir, how old's your son? Oh, he's 9. Okay? Talk to me when he's 15. Tell me if he still likes baseball and tell me if you guys are still friends. Because at that point, right, as a parent, it's tough not to admit, number one, we all got egos, right? Big egos, every one of us. And when it comes to our kids, there's nothing we care more about in this world. We want to be proud of all the things that they do, but as parents, it's very easy to get sucked into that world of youth sports and say, well, we're ranked this, we won this many games, and the narrative becomes about achievement, right? And that's what kids that are 0 to 10, 0 to 12, people who are familiar with psychology and child development, those are the developmental years. Being safe, being loved. That's all they need, right? If you go watch I coach 8U, flag football, T-ball, coach pitch. It's hilarious, right, to see the personalities. And it's tough to see the struggle, right, as parents, if your kid's developmentally slower or whatever the case may be, there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that comes with the sports experience. But what I realize is, I tell my parents this at the beginning of the year, if your son or daughter comes over to me and says, I need to go sit with mommy, go sit with mommy, go sit with daddy. Whatever they need at that point is to feel safe and to feel loved. And we have created the world of youth sports at such a young level of competitive, structured, this whole box that we want to fit kids into, but if you really look at the science behind it, kids aren't designed to fit into those boxes, right? They're designed to go play and have that play experience without all the pressure and all the structure that we want to implement because we're high-level thinkers, we understand peak performance, we want to teach our kids work ethic and teach them to be gritty, right? Which is, I think, most parents' goal, but not understanding you're actually doing the opposite. You're actually creating this foundation of who they are and what makes them valuable based off of sports, instead of the person that they are and teaching them the life skills of who you are is what you bring to what you do, right? And I know there's people in this room that have achieved great things. You guys are a lot smarter than me with your law degrees and your understanding the world of insurance, right? But I also recognize that as I'm going through my identity crisis at 33, 34 years old, right? Not many people get to say they're retired at that age. I'm going through this and I'm hanging out with high-level people like yourselves. And this theme started to pop up where I understand it's not just athletes, right? Sports is a great vehicle for all these amazing things, and we get put up on a pedestal and people know our stats and how much money we made, how many teams we played for. You guys don't have to deal with that, luckily, right? But at the same time, the high-level success that you guys have all achieved at some point in your life started to define you, right? And hopefully you were more level-headed than I was to understand this is a product of the work, this is a product of the community, all these things that we want to give credit to, instead of saying, I'm just the best lawyer, I'm just the best insurance broker, or whatever your title is, and defining yourself by what you do. And that's something we as human beings, this whole achievement-based identity has become a real problem. So what is youth sports to me and why is it important? As I mentioned, 0 to 10, 0 to 12, safe space. Let the kids play. Let's start pulling back some of these intense tournaments, and the fear of missing out that I see and hear from parents is like, well, if I don't start my son or daughter in competitive cheer at 5 years old, she's never going to win a national championship. I said, how much, I don't know anything about cheerleading, right? How much do they practice? 4 days a week. I'm like, my goodness, I was a professional athlete. In our off season, we practiced 3-4 times a week. These aren't professional athletes, they're 6 and 10-year-old girls, right? Same with baseball. I look at social media. We all know the crazy parents. There might be a few in this room. I'm not going to call anybody out. But the idea of our children having that success and our emotional attachment being so intense that we ruin that experience for our children, right? And that's something with the company that I'll get into later. We're really trying to educate parents on what is it like to be a parent in youth sports and how can we do it better. The life lessons, as I mentioned, grit, the ability to show up be a good teammate, all these things. I don't have to tell you guys, you understand why sports are valuable. But those things get pushed to the side when we start talking about the state rankings and how many games we won. And again, it's cool. I told you guys how many national championships and state championships I won. That feels good. But at the same time, that's not what it's all about, right? Community and mentorship, like I mentioned, wouldn't be standing on this stage speaking to you right now without the great mentors, the second moms, the second dads. Incredible that I was able to grow up with the community that I did, despite all the hardships and things that I faced. Lifelong bonds. I like to say about 8 best friends, right? Part of that's the trauma I went through. We bonded through some deep stuff, but I've known guys for 25, 30 years. We play golf once or twice a week. Their kids come over to my house. I coach them in sports. Like, this is, not everybody gets to grow up and stay where they live, and I understand that. But for me, it was a really special experience to be able to coach my best friend's kids and to be able to walk side by side with them on this journey, because as much as I can stand here and talk about being a good sports parent, I still have an ego. I still have thoughts that come up in my head. I still have moments where I try and correct my son or coach my son or my daughter, and you see the emotional shutdown that happens, right? Like Tiger Woods was quoted, I think around the Masters. Charlie Woods, his son, is making a run in a professional golf. Said, "Tiger, does your son take swing advice from you?" He's like, "Well, listen to me." Okay, why is that? Well, I'm his dad, not his coach, right? And I think that's one thing we like to highlight with parents too, is how do we navigate that relationship with our child? Because we, as the parents, are the ones funding it. We're the ones that are most invested in it. We're the ones that care the most about our kids. But that also means that we're probably the biggest problem, and a big reason why youth sports has been pushed into the realm that it's in now. And then the generational impact. When I was in charge of hiring coaches and merging 3 training businesses in my previous venture, we had a coach who had been a coach for 40 years in the area, and he's old school, grinder. I mean, taught us a lot of good stuff, probably some stuff that nowadays you can't get away with as a coach, but at the same time, we're standing up there in this coaches meeting, and he's like, I coached you, your brother. The generational piece that I want to highlight here is we as the adults give this experience to the children, and then the children go and give this experience to that next generation, right? And that's where we have to become more aware of how deep this is and how great of an impact that we can have on the kids in youth sports. Big one I like to highlight is player development over child development. And again, this is age specific. You got a teenage kid, different stage of development than the younger child, but understanding how we can better educate ourselves, the parents within our organizations, the ones that you guys insure, the ones that you guys are representing in these certain situations. Like, how can we educate our parents and the coaches and the directors, right, who are putting this all together to focus on the child development over the player development? I mentioned parents, their emotional attachments. There's obvious examples of that. There's subtle examples, nuances to the conversations in the car ride home or before the game, and that's something that we really try and highlight at 3 Athletics, is kind of these pivotal moments for parents to have a positive or negative impact on their child's experience. Coaches and directors, as I mentioned, I think the most challenging thing for me in what I'm doing now is when I talk to directors of clubs, massive organizations, right, and they're like, yeah, our parents just don't care about that, right? Whether it's mental health or whatever it is, or we've tried that and there wasn't a lot of buy-in. But if you provide them with an opportunity for a recruiting service, they'll take that all day, right? Because they're focused on where am I gonna get my kid to next instead of how do I make them better in the present. Year-round training and tournaments, I think this is probably the biggest problem when we talk about the physical risks. I've mentioned I had 1 elbow surgery, 2 ankle surgeries, and a toe surgery. I'm still not on Casey's level, but the overuse is real, right? And that's something I look at parents and industries where they're training kids like professional athletes, and they're not really professional athletes. Their bodies aren't designed to take year-round throwing of a baseball or kicking a soccer ball. What happens to labrums? What happens to lower backs? The stress fractures, the ligament tears, all these things that are just becoming normalized in youth sports. Like, yeah, my son had Tommy John at 15 years old. Okay, is that like a badge of courage here? Or are we as the adults gonna step back and say, everybody in here understands risk and how to look at it and analyze it. There's a lot of risk to what we've kind of provided as the normal experience for kids. The lack of oversight and knowledge is all those things that I'm talking about here, the mental, emotional, and the physical piece. Some organizations understand it, they just don't know how to solve it. That's where we're trying to come in and bring resources and services to those organizations, say, hey, let us offload some of this off your plate, because they don't want to hear you talk about child development. They want to hear somebody like me or my partner come in and actually have a fresh voice and a fresh face. And then the financial burden. I'm sure everybody in here financially is doing just fine, but we all know people like me that grew up with no money, and my parents could not afford for me to do that. This is 25, 30 years ago. Nowadays, I see people are spending $10,000 for a 9-year-old kid to play baseball. What are we doing? Like, what is the point of all that? I know some of us have the means to do it and give them every opportunity we can, but it's now become a burden, and it's pushing kids out of all different sports, right? Because parents can't afford it. I'll flip through these last couple because I got the 5-minute warning. A couple articles here talking about suicide and addiction, which I'll highlight really quickly, aside from all the family stuff. Starting quarterback my freshman year, scholarship to go play at Eastern Washington, ended up Western Washington, tore his Achilles, prescribed Oxycontin, dead within 4 years. Put him through rehab, paid for him to go to rehab, watched him detox off one of the craziest drugs I've ever seen on my couch for a week before we could get him into rehab. And this is a guy who had all the expectations in the world, didn't play out the way everybody expected to do, dealt with some injuries, give him some pain medication, he's gone. 2-year-old son when he passed away. It's crazy. I also have a cousin who recently passed away from an overdose. He was another kid, a lot of pressure and expectations, following me in kind of the community of baseball, ends up coming up to Washington from Arizona, gets hooked on Oxycontin, and goes down this path for 10 years where he battled addiction. And I think that's something, yeah, suicides are awful, but the long-term addiction that comes with the stress and the coping mechanisms that kids just haven't developed with all the pressure that we're putting on them. And then generational effects. Like I mentioned, when I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I realized how this had been in my family for multiple generations. And I think that's something that empowers me to say, okay, we can do better. I need to start changing and breaking these cycles. And that's, again, what we're trying to get parents to do. Healthy environment to play, raising the awareness. That's why I'm here. That's what I came to talk to you guys about. Developing those programs and the focus on child development, not performance. That's why I formed 3 Athletics, because I experienced all these things. I see what parents are being sold. I understand the fear of missing out and all the things that drive parents to do the crazy things that they do. We got to do a better job collectively as the adults to educate ourselves and be better for our kids. Quickly, I'll mention parent guidebook, interactive guidebook, 85 pages, 9 exercises. Really powerful stuff when done right. Coach's version is very similar, relates to the parents, helping them understand not only their parent-child relationship, but the relationship between coach and parent, which has gotten very toxic, as well as just dealing with your kid getting cut from the JV team. How do you have that conversation? Preparing parents, preparing coaches to be able to model the behavior better for the kids instead of just play the victim, blame somebody. I know I shouldn't probably use that word in here with all the lawyers, but understanding like, hey, we need to teach our kids how to deal with adversity at a young age, but not too young of an age. And then we have the Athletes Journal, which I helped, collaborated with Seth, and this is a 6-month journal with 6 teachings from identity, conscious and subconscious, mindset, triggers, your parent and your coach relationship, all things we feel like are incredibly important. We have a workshop podcast, a few other things. I won't get into all that. I'm happy to talk to any of you guys at some point today. I'll be around later at the event, and I can get into the stuff if you guys are interested. But as I mentioned, this is something very passionate to me from my own personal experience. I was lucky. I was privileged. I worked really hard to play Major League Baseball and overcome a lot of things that I did, but I didn't realize, right, what that was really preparing me for was to be the rookie up here on stage at the SERMA conference, giving my first keynote speech to a bunch of people who are much smarter than me and probably have done multiple of these. But again, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for having me. And if I can